Every writer knows that the best conversations about writing don't happen in classrooms or symposia or any other fancy artisanal setting. They happen at the bar, usually after deadline. That's the vibe we're going for here. This is The Other 51, conversations with writers of all genres about writing. I'm Brian Moritz. Today's guest is James Mirtle of The Athletic. James Mirtle, welcome to The Other 51. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on today is we had a Twitter, disagreement. I guess we had a good conversation back and forth earlier this week about the site you work for, The Athletic, and I wanted to talk to you kind of about what you guys as a company are doing, because despite my skepticism that I wrote about on my blog, I am very intrigued and very hopeful that you as a company are successful. And so I guess just kind of talk about how long have you been working at the Athletic in Toronto?
Almost, well, not quite a year and a half.
Okay.
About a year and 2 or 3 months. Yeah, and I think what you saw on Twitter, it was just some of the frustration that we feel. It feels like ever since I've joined the company, it's been skepticism over and over and over again. And I don't know, I feel like we're one of the feel-good stories kind of in the media right now, when there's been so many layoffs and so many failures and so many companies going bankrupt and all the things that have gone wrong. And, we've kind of gone the other direction and we've been very successful, but the amount of criticism and the number of naysayers that we get is, to me, it's kind of strange. So that's kind of what you ran up against kind of in your blog. You kind of pointed out a few things that you saw that, either weren't going to work with The Athletic or that you were worried about or concerned about. But, I feel like we've been this great positive story and we've got a lot of positive momentum. We've been hiring a lot of people and, hopefully our model can be something that can help save good journalism, not just in sports, but in lots of different respects. So it just would have been, I'm just hoping that, and by coming on the podcast, I can kind of talk about a lot of the positives that we've been able to, a lot of the positive things we've been able to accomplish in the first year and a half.
So I'd love to hear that. I mean, if for some people who don't follow the trade of sports journalism who might be listening to this, kind of walk through what The Athletic is and what's unique about it.
Yeah, I mean, we're entirely digital. We don't have any kind of a print product. We're just sports. We started as a local sports section with different verticals in different cities. I was running the Toronto edition. That's what I was hired to do. And the first city was Chicago. The second city was Toronto. And then we've since moved into Cleveland and Detroit. And as of today, we're in 23 different markets. And our goal by the end of 2018 is to be in every major sports market in North America. The basic idea is you take the sports section out of the newspaper and you have it stand alone. You have it be 100% digital, and you have the content kind of be in-depth, either reporting or analysis. In some cases, interviews with, exclusive interviews with prominent people in the sports world. We're just trying to do things differently and bring a fresh voice to the way that sports is covered. And, the thing that's really different about the business model is that we don't have any advertising at all. We don't have any sponsors. We don't have any advertising. It's just 100% reader supported. So we charge either, $8 to $10 a month, or if you pay up for the year, it's between $45 and $55 for the year. And, when I joined The Athletic, I didn't know if this model was going to work. I didn't know if people were going to sign up, but thankfully they did. And that's where the positive momentum has come from, is that readers have really embraced what we're doing and have signed up.
I was going to ask you that. So when you started and when you started at The Athletic in Toronto, and you just said you didn't know if it'd be successful. So was there a moment that you can think of that you kind of saw that this could work and that this was potentially viable?
The first day I started, I think we had 500 or 600 people sign up. It was just when I announced that that I was going to be doing this, and I put up my first letter from the editor, and it said why I was doing this and what The Athletic was, and we need your support in order to make this happen. Immediately a lot of people started signing up when they understood what we were doing. And then, along the way we had a bunch of little victories like that. We had a bunch of days where, either we had an exclusive with a prominent figure, or, I wrote a letter from the editor in February of last year, just explaining why The Athletic has a paywall and why this is our business model, and just how hard hit journalism has been, and all the people that have lost their jobs. And we hired a lot of people that were unemployed and let go by newspapers. And when that article went up, again, we sold hundreds and hundreds. I think we sold over 1,000 subscriptions there when that, explaining why we have a paywall. So, it's really been small steps along the way, and the surprising thing to me is it hasn't really slowed down. Like, we're still getting, every day, we still get tons and tons of people are signing up. So it's not like there's been a plateau. We haven't hit that yet. And, I know a lot of people look at The Athletic and they think, oh, they're growing too fast, or they're wasting all this money from investors and all these things. But, we have a really large revenue base just because of how many people have signed up. And as long as that continues to be the case, as long as people still sign up en masse, we're going to be able to continue growing, and we're not going to run out of money, and we're not going to be laying people off, and we're not going to overextend ourselves and all these other things. We have really positive momentum with how many people have signed up.
And again, just if people may not be super familiar if they're listening to this, I'm sure most people who listen to this are, but one of the things that makes The Athletic's paywall different from other news sites is that everything is behind the paywall, correct? It's not like, let's say, the New York Times, where you get 5 articles a month or something like that, and then you pay.
We can make articles free, and we do sometimes make them free. But yeah, I would say most of our content is behind the paywall. Yeah, but sometimes if we have a story that's about a charity, an athlete's charity works, or those letters from the editor, and there are definitely times where, or if we have like a really big scoop, or there are just some things that we make free for sure.
It is interesting. One of the courses I teach at Oswego, where I work, is media economics. So we talk a lot about business models for all media, especially print newspapers. And this is one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by The Athletic is that it is so unique. I mean, not just the charging for content and having no advertisers, but like you said, I mean, it's the first real time that that the sports section's kind of been lifted from the bundle of the daily paper and set off on its own, and asking people to pay for it. How much resistance, I'm wondering, have you gotten in your market for people who don't think they should have to pay for news? Because I see that a lot with other newspapers and other news organizations that I'm around or follow. Do you get a lot of resistance to that, or are people kind of generally accepting to that idea? Yeah,
I mean, on social media, there's always going to be a wide variety of opinions. So definitely, there are definitely people that are saying, why would I pay to read your opinions about sports or your coverage of sports when there's XYZ that's still available? And we're not saying that everybody has to pay. We're not expecting everybody to pay. We know that there's going to be, maybe our audience is the top 10% most hardcore sports fans, or the top 20%, or we don't know exactly how big our audience base is going to be, but it's not going to be everybody. Everybody's not going to sign up for a pay product. Mm-hmm. But our price point is really low. Most people are signing up around the $4 or $5 a month kind of range. And we're hoping that barrier to entry is so low, and the amount of content, because the other thing too is that people get all of our content. They get all of our markets. They get every sport that we cover. Mm-hmm. They get everything The Athletic does. We have, scores and highlights and statistics and all kinds of stuff. Our app is absolutely fantastic because the founder of the company, a guy named Alex Mather, he's an app developer, so mm-hmm. that's been a big focus for us. We're hoping that people try the product. We offer a free trial with almost every subscription. Try the product for a week. Most people that do that keep their subscription. We're hoping they try it and like it and say, you know what, this is worth $4 or $5 a month. I'll gladly pay this. And So the challenge for us is to offer a product that is so good, that is better than what's available for free, that people are willing to go over that barrier to entry and pay the money. And that's something we're working on every day, is to try and be good enough that we're better than what's available for free.
And that's one of the things when I've talked to other reporters working on writing about your site and other pay sites that have kind of sprung up. It's that that's the idea I've expressed to them too, is that this can work if I'm paying $5 a month for The Athletic, that I feel like I'm getting $5 worth, that it's better than, or at least different, or somehow kind of worth that money over what I can get for free. I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit more. And you mentioned when you started The Athletic, you were looking for, and the site was talking about doing things differently in sports journalism. And I'm wondering, like, when you started and when you look at it, what about, I guess, traditional digital sports journalism, which is a weird thing to say, but when you look at it, what are some of those things that you want to do differently? What in terms of coverage and writing, do you guys want to do better than, I guess, other news sites?
I think one of the big things, I talk about it, kind of advantages and disadvantages to what we are. The disadvantage is that we're behind a paywall and most of the other outlets aren't. So it's harder to get as many eyeballs on what we're doing, and there's a barrier to entry that other places don't have. The advantages we have, there are a lot of them. We don't have a deadline. Most of the print products, print papers have to be, their deadlines are between 10:30, 11:30 at night. Well, a hockey game, in the case of the Leafs, who I often cover, a hockey game will end at 9:45 or 10 o'clock at night. That's not a lot of time to turn around a story. So, a lot of the times when myself or some of our other Leafs writers or Raptors writers are covering a game, we'll be there till 12:45 or 1 o'clock in the morning, producing a really in-depth story. So, I often say to our staff, it's not about the kind of journalism that you see in other places where they're chasing a high number of hits. We don't concentrate on how many hits a story gets. What we want to see is in-depth reporting. So if that means you only file 2 things this week or 3 things or whatever it is, that's totally fine with us. We would rather have 3 stories that are 2,000 or 2,500 words than 8 or 9 stories that are 700 words, which is kind of the way that journalism is going when you're not behind a paywall. So we're kind of zigging when other outlets are all going in the same direction to post as much as you possibly can, get that hit count high, have a flashy headline on it. We're trying to do almost more magazine-style analysis. And there are other things that we can do, too. I mean, we do a lot of video analysis. We do a lot of analytics and statistical analysis. We have we hired 2 people from NHL teams to write for us. Those are some things that we're doing that other outlets in the market aren't.
And that idea of not concentrating on hits, you kind of alluded to that and mentioned it, but maybe you can go a little more in depth with that. And why is that? That's got to feel freeing to you and your staff, right? I imagine, just from talking to other reporters, that not having to worry about how many shares a story is getting or how many views it's getting or whatever, that's got to feel liberating to the reporters.
Like, we still want people talking about our stories, and we still want them to go quote unquote viral and to be shared. And I mean, that gets more people seeing The Athletic and hitting the paywall and thinking about subscribing. And so we still want people to engage with the content, but it's not just about chasing the bottom line number. We have a bunch of different metrics that we look at that we're interested in. We give readers the ability to rate every story at the bottom of the story, whether they liked it or didn't like it, or they thought it was just okay. And that generates a score for us on every single story that we produce, and it lets us know what our subscribers thought of it. So we can't just produce low-value filler content that has a nice headline on it that gets a high hit count. To us, that's a fail. Mm-hmm. Even though a lot of people tried to read the story, if readers said we don't like this story, that doesn't succeed for us. So we look at how many people subscribe to read the story. We look at the user ratings. Did they like the story? We look at how our subscribers engaged with the story, if they enjoyed it, if they shared it, those kinds of things. And we look at how many people did hit up against the paywall and how many of those people thought the story was worth paying for. So it maybe it sounds subtly different, but it's a lot different than just chasing hit counts, because some stuff that gets a high hit count is, it can be like a troll article. It can be something, that people hated. It can be a story that everyone disliked that gets a whole lot of hits, and chasing just that hit count is such a mistake that some outlets make.
So I'm wondering, in terms of your own work, how much of your job is writing versus being the editor?
It's probably half and half at this point.
Okay.
I mean, I was a full-time reporter, columnist when I was at the Globe and Mail, the national paper. So that's been a change, but there's a lot of, we've grown so fast that a lot of my job is hiring or managing new hires, or, helping freelancers, or deciding how the budget's going to work, what travel we're going to do, long-term planning. I mean, we've been adding cities like crazy, so there's a lot of discussion about, where are we going next? Who are we going to hire? I'm overseeing not only the Canadian operation, but everything we're doing on the NHL side. So it's a lot of work, and I try and still make it to games, and I try and write 2 or 3 things a week, but that means that during the hockey season I'm working pretty much constantly.
So you mentioned that you're in charge of hiring, and I teach a sports journalism class, and I teach young reporters. So I'm really curious, what do you look for in a young journalist, in a new hire? When you're hiring somebody, what do you want to see?
Someone that's unique, someone that stands out, someone that isn't afraid to have a voice and to say something interesting, to tell me something I don't know about the sport that they cover. Someone that is active on social media and has started to establish themselves there as someone that's interesting and worth listening to. We've hired a lot of young people that I found on blogs that were essentially writing for free or writing for $15 a post or whatever, and we've given them a platform and a chance. Some people we'd give them a once a week post with us where they write for $75 or $100 or whatever, and we let them do that weekly for a while, and if they do really well, then we let's write 2 a week, let's write 3 a week, and then if their stories continue to do well, then we hire them on full time. And as we're growing really fast, it's been probably one of the most rewarding things about doing this is trying to find the next generation of sports writers in Canada and on the NHL in general, because with the way that the papers have cut back, they're just that next generation hasn't been developed in Canada in a long time. I mean, I'm considered one of the youngest hockey writers in Canada. I'm 37 years old. I mean, I've been around for 12 years. So that's been really neat, finding these 22-year-old writers just out of school who, while they were going to school, they were writing for these blogs, and they were, building up their Twitter presence, and they were experimenting with, how do I build an audience? How do I find my voice? How do I create content that's unique that no one else is doing? There are young writers that are doing that, and those are the people that we want.
So, kind of to build on that really quick, if a young writer, if one of my students happens to be listening to this, or a young writer is listening to this, and they hear you say you want somebody who's unique, who has a voice that stands out, and stuff like that, what's the next step for them? What can they do while they're in school, or maybe at their first job or whatever? How do you develop that unique style and that your own voice to get noticed by someone like you or someone in your position?
Have a social media account, start your own website, start writing about what you want to write about, and it takes, I did this when I was in school. When I was in grad school in Toronto, I started my own website. It was on Blogspot, as 2003, and I was writing about the NHL, and nobody knew me from a hole in the ground. In the first 2 years I ran the website, it was 200 people were reading it a day, or it was a friends and family endeavor. Over time, it grew into be a very large site, and I got a lot of job offers that resulted from that. I was on the radio, started to get some TV work. You can, in this new kind of digital era, you can build your own identity as a sports writer. You can you can stand out. So you don't necessarily need to be hired by the New York Times or whatever. You can start your own outlet, and it's harder to do now than ever because there is so much competition. But that's where the part about needing to be unique comes into play. And some of the people we've hired are, they fit that bill. They've got a very different voice, and that's why on your site you mentioned that you were worried that The Athletic wasn't bringing in the next generation. I think that we have to, because the kind of content we're trying to do is different. We don't want to just do what the newspaper did and put it behind a paywall, because I don't think that will work. So we're trying to do different content, and I think that means we need different people.
From your days when you were writing as a columnist and as a reporter on the NHL, and when you get to write as a columnist now for The Athletic, what do you look for as a columnist? What makes a good column topic and a good column for you?
It has to be really interesting. It has to grab people. It should have a headline that grabs someone and says, "Oh, that sounds interesting. I want to read about that." And then it should have a lead that's interesting. And you should be telling people things that they don't know. I think if you're telling sports fans what they already know, then you're wasting their time. And people in general are really busy right now. And when they're sitting down to read something, they're looking to be entertained. They're looking either for knowledge or for entertainment, or so. That's the basic answer, and I find that I really try and challenge myself to be unique and be interesting in everything that I do, because there's so many different people writing about sports now that if you don't do that, then you're kind of going to get passed by. So it's definitely challenging, for sure. It's hard to be engaging and different and have content that no one else does day after day after day, but that's kind of what the job is.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about Toronto as a market, because I grew up outside of Buffalo, so I've been near Toronto, been to Toronto, been going to Toronto all of my life. I'm a Leafs fan, kind of a casual Blue Jays fan as well. And I'm wondering, as a market, what's Toronto like, or maybe better phrase, what are some maybe misconceptions that people might have about Toronto as a sports market?
Well, number one, the Leafs are king here. The Leafs drive interest in sports here to an incredible degree, and the fan base for the Leafs is way, way, way bigger than a lot of people understand it to be. It's a global brand. It's one of the most popular teams in the world. And it's not just Toronto, it's Ontario and Canada. When I go on the road, basically all around the league, but especially in the rest of Canada, the arena is always full of Leafs jerseys. There's just a massive, massive appetite for Leafs coverage. So, the Leafs they're the number one team for The Athletic right now. They're the number one driver of the company. And I don't think that's an accident. I think that there's just a huge support base there. And that the Raptors and the Blue Jays are a little bit more niche teams. But what's interesting about them is that they're national teams, because there's only one baseball team in Canada now, and there's only one NBA team in Canada now. So they get support from across the country. So that's about it. And then there's a lot of smaller teams. TFC, the soccer team, has really started to make inroads. They won the championship last year, obviously. So Toronto's a very diverse city, and it's got a lot of different interests. I mean, we got lacrosse, we got a rugby team now, we've got obviously CFL football, but the Leafs are king. The Leafs are what really drive interest in this city beyond everything else.
And obviously, the Leafs have been better the past 2 years. Was it still the case that they were so dominant, the king, even in the years before when they were kind of not so good?
Yeah,
okay,
it was. I mean, like if the Jays are in the playoffs and on their runs, then when that's happening, that really takes over. And I think if one of the things working against the Raptors is that they've always kind of been good but not great, and they haven't really gone past, really deep into the playoffs yet. I think if that happens, that the interest level in the Raptors will go through the roof. But yeah, when the Leafs were bad, there's a lot of people paying attention to why are they bad and how are they bad and what are they doing to get better and all those kinds of things. And that was was a long portion of my career was spent kind of chronicling all the things that were wrong with the Leafs. So, I'm intimately familiar with everything that they were doing wrong.
So as someone who's watched enjoyably the past 2 years, I mean, what was going so wrong for so many years, and what got better? I mean, it can't be just as simple as they got Austin Matthews. So what?
No, it's not. No. It's they were as an organization, they were fundamentally really badly managed. They were making a lot of really poor decisions, and it starts at the top. You have to have bright, innovative people at the top of your organization now. And hockey's changing so fast with the salary cap and with analytics coming in and all these things. And the Leafs just weren't evolving. They were stuck in very old school methodologies, and they didn't want to rebuild, and they didn't want to, work on drafting and development. And it really cost the organization a lot of years. And the good news was that they were trying to win, and they were bad so many of those years that they got some good players at the top of the draft. And part of the reason they were able to turn it around so fast is not just Austin Matthews, but they had William Nylander and Morgan Rielly and James Van Riemsdyk and Nazem Kadri. They had this base of players they had picked high in the draft over the years just by accidentally being bad. So, they got really fortunate that way.
Right. So I'm wondering, one thing I like to think about and end up talking about a lot is the importance of place and setting to stories. And I'm wondering, is there anything specific about a good Toronto story?
Man, that's a great question. I'm not from Toronto originally.
Okay.
I moved here 15 years ago for school. I'm from the West Coast, so I write about the city as a little bit of an outsider. I mean, I've lived here 15 years, obviously, and my mother grew up here and things like that, so I have a little bit of history in the city, but trying to think of the place. I don't know, that's a really good question. I would say that myself as a writer, I don't have the kind of historical ethos I wasn't born here. I didn't grow up cheering for the Leafs. I'm kind of like an outside observer trying to objectively talk about it, but kind of that passion, I think, in the city that maybe you mean with the sense of place. That's not really my domain to weigh in on, but it's an interesting question. And Toronto is such a fast growing, changing city that it's been a really interesting place to live over the last 15 years. Yeah,
and I've noticed that, how much it has changed. And I wonder, and I'm speculating here from a very distant observation, but I wonder if there's if there's a provincial portion of Toronto, like that historical aspect to it, and that kind of meets up with the growing multiculturalism in Toronto. I don't know, but that's a fascinating aspect of the city.
Well, the different teams have very different fan bases, very different. TFC, the soccer team's very young. The Argos, the CFL team's very old in suburbs. The Raptors are that really multicultural team. The Leafs are more. I mean, I think the Leafs have lost some of the younger generations just by being bad for so long, but that's going to start coming back. And when I walk around my neighborhood, I see little kids wearing the Austin Matthews jerseys running around, and it's starting to come back because the dads and the grandfathers and the great grandfathers were all Leafs fans going way back, and I think that, and so you've got all these teams and they've got all different, and then the Blue Jays are kind of they won their championships in '92 and '93. They won a whole generation of fans, kind of around my age, kind of late 30s, early 40s. That there are people that in Canada that love baseball more than hockey because of those Blue Jays teams, which is very unusual for me as someone from Western Canada, where hockey is 100% king, and there's some baseball, but not a lot. So there are generations of fans, and they're starting to raise their kids where baseball is the number one sport. And I have friends that, they love Major League Baseball, and they watch way more Blue Jays games than they do NHL. And so that's when I say the city's changing, it's spreading into all of these different ways, where it used to just be kind of stodgy and kind of mostly hockey focused. That's beginning to shift.
What's the best thing you've read lately?
Oh man, I'm going to be hard pressed to pick something that's not from our site because I spend so much time. This ties in with what we're kind of talking about, but Scott Wheeler, who's a really young writer that we've got just out of finished school last April, he went on a 3 games in 4 days road trip on a bus with an ECHL team, the Brampton Beast, which is a local. So it's basically like double A hockey. And he rode on the bus with them. It was minus 20 degrees Celsius the whole trip. The bus broke down. The players didn't get to eat for an entire day. It was basically just a disaster. And he really got into what is it like to be a pro hockey player at the lowest rung that exists. And, some of the interviews he did, the players were, in tears, or they were talking about how difficult their life is. And that story, it came in from Scott at 13,000 words. So here's a guy who's 22 years old. He writes a 13,000 word story. He built in 3 or 4 photo galleries. It was amazing. And I was very concerned what the story was going to be when I opened it up and started editing it. And it was brilliant. It was great. We cut it down a little bit, but I think it ran at 12,000 words. That's an example of a story that we made free just because we thought it was such a spectacular achievement, what he built with that story. And it's one of the most successful things that the company has ever done. And the really interesting thing with that story is that it sold a lot of subscriptions even though we made it free. And so many people read the story, and if you come to The Athletic on a free story, at the bottom it'll say, if you want to support great journalism like this, you can subscribe here, and here's 20% off or whatever. And, more than 100 people did that. So it was a free story, and people were signing up to pay to be part of The Athletic because of that great achievement that Scott did. And we'll be submitting that story for major national awards here in Canada, and I won't be surprised if it wins. It was a really, really, it was a proud moment for the company, and good on him for being able to execute on that story.
That sounds awesome. I'll make sure to put a link to that in show notes for this episode. James, if people want to follow you or learn more about what you guys are doing, where's the best place to find you? Yeah,
check out theathletic.com or download the app. You can just go on your app store and search for The Athletic. You get a free trial if you download the app. And, I'm very active on social media, so if people want to talk to me on Twitter, ask me questions or whatever, I'm happy to do that. I'm always interacting with people on there. And my Twitter handle is just my last name, which is Mirtle.
All right. Well, James, this has been fabulous. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for reaching out and having me on.
As always, thanks for listening to The Other 51. You can find show notes for this episode and all our episodes at sportsmediaguy.com on the Other 51 tab. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. I can highly recommend Overcast for this. Our theme music is by Ellie Moritz.